Sophia Whitmore collapsed before the sentence left her mouth. 1 second she was standing in the center of the executive lounge at Terminal A, dressed in a perfectly tailored ivory coat, one hand gripping her phone while 3 senior board members stared at a digital merger file glowing on her tablet. And the next, her fingers loosened. The phone slipped, shattered against the polished marble floor, and her body followed with it. Hard, sudden, violent enough that the sound silenced the entire lounge before anyone understood what had happened. A half-finished espresso rolled across the floor, black liquid spreading beneath the chrome legs of designer chairs, while the billionaire CEO of Whitmore Biotech lay motionless under the cold airport lights, her eyes half open but unfocused lips, pale breath uneven. For 1 impossible second, nobody moved. A private equity director took 1 step backward. A woman near the champagne counter covered her mouth but didn't kneel. Her own assistant froze with both hands in the air, as if touching the wrong person might break protocol. Somewhere behind the glass wall, aircraft lights blinked through morning fog while the boarding announcement for New York echoed overhead absurdly calm against the panic beginning to spread. "Call someone," one executive shouted, but even he didn't bend down. "Is she breathing?" Another asked from a distance, unwilling to get closer. Sophia's chest jerked once, then stopped long enough for terror to enter the room. Her smartwatch alarm began vibrating against her wrist, flashing elevated heart rate, ignored by everyone staring as though wealth itself should know how to survive. Then a chair scraped sharply across the floor. A man from the far end of the lounge moved before security even reacted. He came from the public seating side near the window, carrying a worn backpack over one shoulder, his boarding pass half visible in one hand, a little boy trailing him in sneakers and a faded blue hoodie. "Eli, stay there," he said, calm enough that the child stopped instantly. The man dropped to one knee beside Sophia with no hesitation, 2 fingers already at her neck before anyone asked who he was. "She has a pulse, barely. Someone bring me that medical kit now." His voice cut through the room with authority so sharp that even suited executives obeyed before questioning him. He tilted Sophia's head, checked her airway, loosened the collar at her throat, then looked up once cold, exact, fully in control. "Who gave her caffeine? How long has she been standing? Did she complain about chest pressure?" No one answered. No one knew. The assistant whispered, trembling, "She hasn't slept in 2 days." His eyes changed instantly. "Then stop crowding her and call airport medical response now, because you have less than 1 minute before this gets worse." The woman in the navy suit nearest to Sophia finally snapped out of her paralysis and rushed toward the emergency cabinet mounted near the lounge entrance, nearly slipping on the spilled espresso as Dominic Hale kept 2 fingers pressed against Sophia Whitmore's neck, counting under his breath with the kind of precision that came only from repetition carved into muscle memory. Around him, expensive shoes circled but never crossed the invisible line his presence had created. The executives who had dominated the room seconds earlier now stood like uncertain witnesses waiting for instruction from a man whose jacket looked old enough to have been folded too many times into overhead bins. Sophia's breathing returned in shallow, unstable pulls, but her eyelids fluttered without focus. Dominic leaned closer, watching the tiny, involuntary twitch in her jaw, the pulse beneath pale skin, the faint tremor in her fingers that everyone else missed. "Has she eaten?" he asked without looking up. Her assistant shook her head too late. "Coffee since 4 this morning. She had a call with London then, Frankfurt then." "Of course she didn't eat one," board member muttered, more annoyed than concerned, as if collapse were merely bad timing. Dominic reached for Sophia's wrist and glanced at the smartwatch flashing warnings in red. Elevated heart rate. Oxygen irregularity. Stress overload alerts ignored for hours. She's crashing from exhaustion and cardiac stress. Keep her flat. The assistant returned with the emergency kit, hands trembling so badly she nearly dropped it, and Dominic caught it one-handed before it hit the floor. He opened it with immediate familiarity, scanning contents in less than a second, dismissing half of them without comment. Airport medical team, he asked. 3 minutes out, security answered from the doorway. Dominic's jaw tightened almost invisibly. Then we use 3 minutes. He lifted Sophia's chin slightly, checked pupil reaction with the lounge light overhead, then instructed raise her legs. Not too high. You take that folded coat and put it under her calves. A senior executive obeyed before realizing he was obeying. Eli stood exactly where he had been told, near the window backpack, still on, watching his father with a calm expression too mature for an 8-year-old, as if none of this surprised him. Sophia's breathing caught sharply, then faltered again. Dominic leaned closer. Sophia, stay with me. Open your eyes. Her lashes moved but did not fully rise. The assistant whispered, stunned, You know her name. Dominic did not answer. He had already read the conference badge clipped to her coat. A second later, Sophia's fingers curled weakly against the marble floor, and for one terrifying beat, her pulse dipped beneath his fingertips. Dominic's voice sharpened instantly. ED now! Open it! Security handed him the device, and the lounge, full of people who negotiated billion-dollar contracts without blinking, watched in silence as he opened the machine with practiced speed that made even airport personnel hesitate before speaking. He placed the pad's exactly checked rhythm, waited for analysis, then held everyone back with one hand before the machine even spoke. Clear. The automated voice confirmed what he already knew. No shock advised. He exhaled, once adjusted her airway again, then counted breathing intervals like someone who had done this under gunfire storms collapsing concrete, or worse. A doctor from airport response burst in with 2 medics less than 30 seconds later and immediately slowed when he saw Dominic already controlling the situation. What happened? The doctor asked. Dominic answered without lifting his eyes. Female mid-30s collapse under prolonged stress. Probable arrhythmia triggered by severe exhaustion. Transient oxygen drop. Pulse unstable but returning. No seizure markers, pupils reactive, no visible trauma, caffeine overload, likely monitor for cardiac event. The doctor stopped speaking entirely for a moment because no panicked witness delivered information like that. He knelt opposite Dominic, checked Sophia himself, then gave the smallest nod that only professionals recognized. You medical Dominic finally leaned back enough to let them work. Used to be useful, he said. It was the first answer he gave that felt like it belonged to him rather than the emergency. Sophia's eyelids opened, then unfocused at first, then narrowing under the lights. The first thing she saw was not the medic or her assistant, but the silhouette of the man kneeling beside her, broad shoulders blocking the glare, one hand steady on the floor, eyes sharp and unreadable. Don't sit up yet, he said, voice lower now, almost quiet. For some reason, she listened immediately, though her head still rang and the room moved in fragments. Who? She tried, but her throat failed her. Save your breath, he replied. A medic fitted oxygen near her face while her assistant burst into tears she had apparently delayed until Sophia reopened her eyes. The doctor asked routine questions, but Sophia kept trying to look past him toward the stranger. She saw the worn seam near his cuff, the plain wedding ring still on his hand, though no wife stood beside him, the tiny scar near his jaw, and then the little boy by the window who had not moved once. Dad, Eli asked softly. Dominic turned immediately, the authority leaving his face in 1 second. 2 more minutes. That change struck Sophia harder than the collapse itself, the way a man who had just commanded an emergency room atmosphere with absolute certainty answered one child with complete softness. Security asked for his name for the incident report, but Dominic was already standing. Airport medical has it from here. Sir, we need your details, one medic said. Passenger manifest has my seat. At least wait, she may need. She needs a hospital and 8 hours of sleep more than she needs me. Sophia forced herself to speak again, breath weak beneath the oxygen line. Wait. He stopped, but only because the voice came from the floor behind him. For the first time, he looked directly at her fully, and she saw something she could not place. Not pride, not urgency, but distance, as though stepping into emergencies was easier for him than staying after them. "Thank you," she managed. His expression did not change. "Next time, eat before signing contracts." A few executives actually looked offended that he spoke to her like that, but Sophia almost smiled despite the dizziness because nobody in her world spoke without calculation, and his bluntness landed like truth. Then he picked up his backpack, crossed to Eli, took the boy's hand, and moved toward the lounge exit before anyone thought to block him. "Sir," the assistant called, still crying. "Your name." Without turning, he answered only once. "Dominic." By the time security reached the doorway, he and the child were already absorbed into the terminal flow outside the glass. Sophia was transferred onto a medical stretcher, but even while monitors attached to her wrist and chest, she kept staring toward the door where he had disappeared. "Find him," she said. Her assistant blinked. "Ma'am, please don't talk. Find him." The doctor warned her again about blood pressure, but Sophia ignored him. "Passenger records, lounge cameras. I want to know who he is." One board member immediately objected. "Sophia, the merger call starts in 40 minutes. She turned her head slowly toward him, pale but suddenly cold enough to stop speech. "I nearly died on your schedule." No one answered after that. 20 minutes later, in the private medical room beside Gate 14. Sophia sat upright against medical advice while airport staff reviewed footage from the executive lounge monitor. The screen showed the collapse from above, executives freezing her assistant, screaming security, hesitating, and then Dominic entering frame from the far edge carrying an ordinary backpack. His son stopping exactly when told, his body dropping beside hers with terrifying speed and certainty. Sophia watched him frame by frame. There was no hesitation, no checking with others, no panic. His hand placement was exact. His movements wasted nothing. Even the doctor beside her leaned closer. "That man's trained," he said quietly. "Not basic first aid. Advanced field response." "Military," Sophia asked. "Maybe emergency services. Maybe more." Another angle showed Dominic's face briefly as he looked up during AED analysis, calm, focused entirely, unlike a random traveler. Sophia leaned forward, despite dizziness. "Zoom in." The technician enlarged the grainy image. Eli appeared in the background, waiting silently, used to this version of his father. Sophia noticed then what no one else mentioned. The boy never looked scared. That meant he had seen this before. Her assistant entered, holding a printed manifest from the New York flight. "We found one Dominic in Economy Boarding Group C, Dominic Hale, seat 34A, traveling with one minor, Eli Hale." Sophia took the paper herself. Dominic Hale. The name meant nothing, and yet something about the face refused to leave her mind. "Delay my flight if needed," she said. "Ma'am, the board." "Delay the board." She stood too quickly and the room tilted, but she steadied herself with one hand against the wall. The doctor protested immediately. "You should not be walking. Then I'll walk slowly." Outside boarding had already begun. Through the terminal glass, she saw economy passengers moving through the gate, while executives whispered around her, as though the world had shifted because one unknown man had acted while all of them froze. Sophia tightened her coat, still pale, still unstable, and stared toward Gate 22, where Dominic Hale had vanished. For the first time in years, the billion-dollar meeting waiting in New York no longer felt like the most important thing boarding that aircraft. By the time Sophia Whitmore reached Gate 22, boarding had nearly closed, and the airport's polished calm had returned as if 20 minutes earlier, one of the most powerful women in the terminal had not nearly died on imported marble while executives froze around her. The airline attendant recognized her immediately and offered to escort her through priority boarding, but Sophia ignored the gesture and kept scanning faces beyond the line until she saw him 3 rows ahead, standing near the final scanner with a worn backpack over one shoulder and one hand resting lightly on Eli Hale's shoulder, while the boy studied a folded paper airplane he had apparently made from the corner of an old boarding document. Dominic did not look back until the scanner beeped for his pass, and even then his eyes found Sophia, only because the attendant near her suddenly whispered her name too loudly. For a fraction of a second, surprise crossed his face, followed by something closer to resignation, as if he understood instantly that gratitude from people like her rarely arrived alone. "Mr. Hale," Sophia called, her voice still weak enough that the effort tightened her chest. He turned fully now, Eli glancing between them with quiet curiosity. Around them, passengers slowed without pretending not to listen. "You shouldn't be walking," Dominic said first, as though the collapse still outranked any thank you she might offer. Sophia almost laughed, because even now he sounded like he was continuing unfinished treatment, rather than speaking to a stranger. "And you shouldn't disappear after saving someone. Airport medics were there. That's not an answer." He looked toward the gate, then at Eli, then back at her with the expression of a man measuring whether staying another 30 seconds would complicate something he preferred simple. Planes don't wait for unfinished conversations. Mine can. Dominic glanced once at the private boarding call still paused behind her, the subtle signs that everyone around already knew she could delay things most passengers could not. "Lucky you," he said. Eli tugged lightly at his father's sleeve. "Dad, she's the lady from the floor." Sophia crouched slightly despite the dizziness and met the boy's eyes. "I'm trying not to be the lady from the floor anymore." Eli gave a serious nod. "Dad said you need real food." Dominic exhaled through his nose, embarrassed for the first time. Eli. But Sophia smiled an expression her own staff saw too rarely to trust. "Your dad seems to say important things very directly. Because people waste time when they panic," Eli replied, repeating something clearly learned by memory. Boarding staff called final economy passengers. Dominic adjusted the strap on his backpack. "You should sit before you collapse again. At least tell me how you knew exactly what to do." His answer came after the smallest pause. "Because some jobs don't let you guess." Then he stepped through the gate scanner before she could ask more. Sophia stood there a second longer than necessary, pulse still irregular for reasons no monitor could fully explain, then boarded through first class, while her assistant caught up breathlessly carrying 2 phones and 3 messages from the board. "Nathan Mercer has called 6 times, the assistant said, voice tight. "London investors are demanding confirmation the merger signs tonight." Sophia took her seat but did not open the tablet waiting there. Instead, she stared toward the curtain separating first class from economy. "Tell Nathan I'm alive, which should already improve his forecast. He says the board needs you online before landing. He always needs something." Once airborne, the cabin lights dimmed and the aircraft leveled into cloud. Sophia finally accepted the tray placed before her broth fruit. Bread she would normally ignore, but before lifting the spoon, she saw the unread messages flooding her screen. Market volatility, legal review deadlines, investor concerns, PR containment in case airport footage leaked. Nathan Mercer's final message stood alone at the top. "Do not let weakness become narrative. We sign tonight." Sophia read it twice, then locked the screen without replying. Her body still carried the strange heaviness that follows collapse, the humiliating reminder that organs answer biology before ambition. Yet what unsettled her more was that while an entire executive lounge had hesitated, a man from economy had acted without looking around for permission. 30 minutes into the flight, turbulence struck hard enough to rattle glasses and draw nervous sounds from the rear cabin. Sophia heard raised voices beyond the curtain before a flight attendant rushed past first class carrying an oxygen canister. Instinct overrode dignity. She unbuckled and followed despite protest from crew. 2 rows into economy, she found the source immediately, an elderly passenger clutching his chest, breathing too fast, panic amplifying the turbulence while flight attendants spoke over one another trying to decide whether to call for onboard medical help. Dominic was already kneeling beside the man, one hand steady on the armrest, voice low enough that only the passenger heard clearly. Look at me. Slow breath in. Hold. Good. Again. Eli sat one row back seatbelt fastened, utterly unsurprised. A flight attendant turned when Sophia appeared and almost protested, but Dominic had already checked the passenger's pulse. He's panicking, not infarcting. Oxygen low because he's feeding the panic. Keep him upright, no crowding. Are you a doctor? The attendant asked. No. Then how do you... Because if you all keep talking at once, he'll faint before we land. The authority returned instantly, not loud, just absolute. The passenger obeyed him faster than the uniformed crew. Sophia watched again, the same efficiency, no performance, no need to impress, just intervention stripped to essentials. When the man stabilized, Dominic stood and noticed Sophia still there, holding the seat back for balance. You ignored my advice already, he asked. Apparently you did too, she answered. You said airport medics had it. This one came with altitude. One flight attendant whispered to another, clearly trying to place him. Sophia lowered her voice. You've done this too many times to be ordinary. Dominic looked toward Eli before replying. Ordinary people still learn difficult things. That's not an answer either. You ask questions like someone used to being answered, and you avoid answers like someone who used to matter publicly. That landed closer than she intended because something shuddered briefly behind his eyes. He returned to his seat without replying. Sophia remained standing 1 second too long before dizziness returned sharply enough to force her back toward first class. By landing, Nathan Mercer had sent 11 more messages. In the black car waiting outside JFK, he joined her by video before she even reached Manhattan. His face filled the screen, perfect tie, perfect lighting, perfect irritation. You delayed 2 legal signatures and vanished for 40 minutes before takeoff. Good evening to you too, Nathan. Investors heard there was a medical issue. Investors hear weather reports and panic too. Sophia, this merger cannot tolerate unpredictability. The word irritated her more than usual because her chest still remembered marble. My body collapsing counts as unpredictability now. Nathan did not soften. Your body belongs to market confidence until this closes. Her assistant lowered her eyes instantly, as if hearing something indecent spoken too plainly. Sophia looked out the window at city lights sliding across wet glass. Interesting choice of words. I'm protecting the company. No, Nathan. You're protecting the timetable. He shifted tone, which meant calculation. Then let me protect both. The board dinner is in 90 minutes. You need to appear strong. I nearly lost consciousness this morning. Then wear stronger lipstick. The call ended because Sophia ended it, not because he finished. Silence filled the car. For years, she had mistaken endurance for control. Today, the difference felt suddenly expensive. Yet even as Manhattan rose ahead, her thoughts kept drifting back to row 34A, to the boy who repeated medical truths like bedtime lessons to a man who spoke like every second counted, because once, perhaps seconds, had failed him. Meanwhile, Dominic stepped off the same aircraft through economy exit carrying Eli's backpack because the child had fallen asleep before landing. At baggage claim, he balanced both bags and his son with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this alone too many times. Eli woke halfway to the taxi stand. Are we late? Only for dinner. Microwave pasta. Luxury edition, Dominic said. And the boy smiled, because both knew luxury meant extra cheese if there was any left. Their apartment in Queens occupied the 3rd floor above a laundromat where pipes complained every winter, and the hallway light flickered when neighbors used the microwave downstairs. Dominic unlocked the door, one-handed, set Eli down, and moved automatically through their routine shoes off lunchbox rinsed school folder, checked kettle on. On the fridge hung unpaid utility reminders beside Eli's spelling test, marked with a bright red A. The kitchen table held a bill from the private therapy program Dominic refused to cancel because it had helped Eli after his mother's death. Another envelope remained unopened, hospital debt, old enough that he already knew the amount without reading it. Eli changed clothes and returned carrying a school form. Field trip money due Friday. Dominic scanned it while stirring pasta on low heat. Aquarium trip. $20. He placed it beside the bills without comment. Eli noticed anyway. I don't have to go. Dominic looked up immediately. You do if you want to. Only if it's okay. It's okay. The lie was gentle practiced, and Eli accepted it because children often accept love disguised as certainty. After dinner, Eli finished homework while Dominic sat at the small table opening the one email he had ignored all day, temporary contract renewal denied. The logistics company where he worked overnight airport emergency freight handling had cut weekend hours again. He read the line twice, expression unchanged, then closed the laptop before Eli noticed. The phone rang unexpectedly just after 9. Unknown number. Dominic almost ignored it, but answered because unknown numbers sometimes meant school bills or hospitals. Mr. Hale, a female voice said. Yes, this is Sophia Whitmore's office. Silence stretched just enough for Eli to look up from homework. Dominic leaned back in his chair. I assumed first class had already forgotten economy. Ms. Whitmore would like to meet tomorrow. Why? To thank you properly. He looked at the unpaid bills, the field trip form, the sleeping city beyond cracked glass, then at Eli tracing spelling words in pencil. People with her schedule don't arrange meetings for thank you. The assistant hesitated because he was correct. There may also be a professional question. Dominic's expression hardened slightly. Old instincts returned before he wanted them. What kind of question she didn't specify. Noon, Whitmore Tower, Eli mouthed silently. The floor lady Dominic almost smiled despite himself. Tell Ms. Whitmore noon is difficult. She said you saved her life. That happened before noon. He ended the call politely, but not firmly enough to mean no. Across Manhattan, 30 floors above the city, Sophia sat alone in her office while Nathan Mercer argued outside with legal counsel about delayed signatures. On her screen remained 2 Windows merger projections worth billions, and an archived article she had finally found after searching Dominic Hale's name. The photo was 12 years old. Younger face, same eyes, wearing emergency response gear beside collapsed flood debris, headline faded but unmistakable. Federal Field Specialist Dominic Hale, credited in multi-state rescue operation. Sophia leaned closer. Another article followed: commendation, advanced disaster medicine certification, elite response deployment. Then nothing. Career vanished 7 years earlier. No interviews, no later photos, no explanation. Nathan entered without knocking. You're still researching airport strangers? Sophia turned the screen toward him only long enough for him to see the headline. This stranger saved me while your board members checked their shoes. Nathan barely glanced. Then send flowers. He disappeared from federal emergency records. People leave jobs. Not like this. Nathan crossed his arms. Sophia tomorrow decides whether we own Helix Med by midnight. She closed the laptop slowly. Tomorrow, Nathan, I want 1 hour before board briefing. For what? Her answer came without hesitation now. To meet the only man I've seen all day who knew exactly what mattered when time became expensive. At 11:58 the next morning, Whitmore Tower reflected a pale Manhattan sky like a blade held upright over the city. 48 floors of engineered confidence rising above traffic that never truly stopped. And Dominic Hale stood in front of its glass entrance, wearing the same dark jacket from the airport, one hand holding Eli's small backpack, because school had called an hour earlier to say a pipe burst in the elementary building and all afternoon classes were canceled. He had almost refused to come when the second call from Sophia's office arrived, but Eli had looked at him with that quiet curiosity children carry when they sense life leaning toward a moment adults cannot yet name. You saved her, Eli had said, while tying his own shoes. Maybe she wants to say thank you with expensive cookies. Dominic had answered that people in towers rarely offered cookies, but he still brought the boy because there was no one else to leave him with, and because part of him trusted crowded lobbies more than empty apartments when conversations felt uncertain. Inside the marble lobby swallowed footsteps and voices alike. Reception staff recognized his name before he finished saying it, which immediately made him uncomfortable. The woman behind the desk smiled too carefully the way people smile when instructed that someone unusual matters today. "Ms. Whitmore is expecting you, Mr. Hale. 47th floor." Her eyes dropped to Eli. "And you too." Eli stared upward at the elevator lights like they were counting down a launch sequence. "This building smells expensive," he whispered once the doors closed. Dominic almost smiled. That usually means nothing inside should be touched. When the elevator opened, Sophia Whitmore stood waiting outside the conference corridor instead of sending an assistant dressed in charcoal gray, pale but composed, though the faint exhaustion beneath her eyes had not disappeared. Dominic noticed immediately she had obeyed one instruction. At least she was holding tea instead of coffee. Eli noticed something else first. "You're not on the floor today." Sophia laughed a real laugh this time, small but unguarded enough to surprise even herself. "That's progress." She crouched slightly to Eli's height. "And I promised myself breakfast. Dad says breakfast stops people from falling in public." Dominic exhaled through his nose in surrender. "He also says too much." "He says the correct things," Sophia answered before rising again. For a brief second, the corridor quieted around them, glass walls separating them from a boardroom already filling with senior executives preparing for the most important merger vote in Whitmore Biotech's history. Nathan Mercer stood inside speaking to legal counsel, saw Dominic through the glass, and his expression hardened immediately. "You brought your son," Sophia said, not as criticism but observation. "School flooded. Good. I prefer honest complications." She led them not to the boardroom first, but to a smaller executive lounge overlooking the river where breakfast sat untouched except for fruit already cut into precise cubes. Dominic remained standing until Sophia gestured again. "Please. I invited you because sitting down feels less like interrogation." "That depends who asks the questions." Eli had already found the window and pressed his hands lightly against the glass, watching helicopters move above the East River. Sophia poured tea slowly, buying herself a second before speaking. "I found your name in federal archives." Dominic's eyes stayed on the cup, not her face. Archives forget faster than people think. They remembered enough. She slid a printed article across the table. 12-year-old photograph, Dominic younger wearing field emergency gear beside flood wreckage, face sharper but unmistakable. Eli looked at the photo, then at his father with open pride he rarely showed in public. "That one's in the hallway drawer," he said softly. Sophia turned to the child. "You knew," Eli nodded. "Dad used to save lots of people." Dominic took the article and folded it once neatly before placing it back down. "Used to? Why stop?" Sophia asked. The answer did not come immediately because the room shifted under that question, not physically but emotionally, like air before weather changes. Eli looked away first, which told Sophia the story lived in the house already, even if incomplete. Dominic's voice lowered. "Because one day, the person I couldn't save mattered more than all the ones I did." Sophia understood enough not to ask further yet. Before silence thickened, the boardroom doors opened across the corridor and Nathan Mercer stepped in without invitation. "Sophia, legal counsel is waiting. Investors are live in 7 minutes." And he stopped when he saw Dominic seated across from her and Eli near the glass. "We are discussing priorities," Sophia said calmly. Nathan did not hide irritation. With airport passengers, Dominic stood before the insult finished, not aggressive, simply unwilling to stay seated beneath that tone. Eli instantly turned from the window, reading the room faster than most adults. Nathan's eyes moved over Dominic's jacket, then Eli's backpack, calculating class before value as he always did. This floor requires authorization. Sophia's voice sharpened in a way that made assistants outside pretend not to hear. He has more authorization here today than half the room next door. Nathan gave a thin smile. Because he performed first aid. Because he acted when everyone else froze. Nathan ignored the correction and looked directly at Dominic. And now what exactly do you expect? Compensation publicity? Eli frowned before Dominic answered, which Sophia noticed instantly. Dad didn't ask for anything, the boy said, voice quiet but firm. Nathan barely acknowledged him. A mistake. Sophia filed away instantly because cruelty reveals itself fastest around children. Dominic put one hand lightly on Eli's shoulder. Not restraint, but reassurance. We were leaving anyway. No, Sophia said, standing now. You're staying. Nathan lowered his voice. Sophia, this is not serious. It becomes serious when someone in my company thinks gratitude is weakness. The boardroom screen behind the glass lit with waiting investors. Nathan looked toward the clock, then back to her. The merger vote begins in 4 minutes. Sophia held his gaze long enough to shift the balance, then let them wait 4 more. She turned to Dominic. Yesterday you asked what mattered when time becomes expensive. Today I'm answering. She led them directly into the boardroom. 20 executives stopped speaking at once when Sophia entered with Dominic and Eli beside her. Screens glowed with legal figures, projected acquisitions, market exposure, projected medical patents worth billions. No seat had been prepared for strangers, which somehow made their presence stronger. Nathan moved first to contain optics. Sophia perhaps later numb. Now. Her voice cut through the room cleanly. She remained standing rather than taking the head chair. Yesterday, before takeoff, I collapsed in an airport lounge full of experienced leaders, attorneys, investors, and decision-makers. No one moved. A few had heard rumors. Few expected public confirmation. Most of the people in that room stepped backward. Her eyes found 3 directors who had indeed been there. None met her gaze. One man moved forward. She gestured toward Dominic, who looked as though he would rather face turbulence again than polished attention. Eli stood close beside him, one small hand gripping backpack straps. This is Dominic Hale. He saved my life before airport medics arrived, and he did it with a level of field precision none of us possessed. One director cleared his throat awkwardly. Another tried politeness. We appreciate the gesture, but this is not a gesture, Sophia interrupted. Because last night I reviewed who he is. She pressed a remote. Dominic's old Federal Rescue photo filled the boardroom screen. Silence landed harder than before. Nathan's expression shifted for the first time. Not guilt, not shame, but surprise that information had outrun him. Sophia continued. Former Federal Emergency Field Specialist, multi-state rescue commendations, advanced disaster medicine certification, disaster response deployments across 3 major national incidents, another slide flood rescue citation, another emergency commendation. Dominic looked at the screen once, then away, jaw tightening, because praise built from old ghosts still hurt differently than insult. He left public service years ago, Sophia said, voice softer now, after losing his wife. That detail altered the room in ways numbers never could. Eli looked down, then slowly up again, not ashamed, simply holding the truth with practiced quiet. Nathan tried one last practical pivot. Sophia, admirable history, but investors are waiting for acquisition signatures. She turned to him fully. Exactly why he belongs in this room for the next 10 minutes. Confusion spread instantly. Sophia tapped another screen, emergency readiness projections for Helix Med's hospital manufacturing division, an annex buried deep in merger paperwork. Last night I reread the safety appendix everyone planned to sign without discussion. Legal counsel shifted visibly. This division manufactures rapid response medical units, and our disaster deployment protocols are underfunded by 20% because no one here has field tested what those numbers mean. Dominic's eyes lifted sharply now because he understood instantly what she had done. She had dragged practical life into theoretical power. Mr. Hale Sophia said not as performance, but invitation. If a city flood cuts response access by 6 hours, is this deployment model usable? Every board member looked at Dominic. He almost refused on instinct. Then Eli looked at him with quiet certainty that said, "Children sometimes know when adults should stop hiding." Dominic stepped toward the screen. "No," he said simply. "Because your mobile units assume roads exist." He pointed to the diagram. "Flood zones erase roads first. Airdrop windows are wrong here. Generator placement fails if intake vents sit this low. Your emergency refrigeration fails in heat if backup battery cycles overlap." Silence changed shape, no longer polite, now attentive. He spoke without jargon for effect, only precision born from memory. And whoever designed this has never unloaded medical gear knee-deep in water while trying not to lose insulin to current. One investor on screen leaned closer. Another legal advisor began taking notes. Nathan opened his mouth, then closed it because interruption would now sound ignorant. Sophia watched the room realize what airports had learned yesterday. Expertise does not announce itself with titles. Dominic stopped after less than 2 minutes, already uncomfortable with focus. But the damage to pretense was done. One senior board member asked quietly, "How many field operations did you run?" Dominic answered without pride. "Enough to know paper survives easier than people." The sentence settled like a verdict. Sophia looked around the room. "We pause signature until safety revision." Nathan objected immediately. "That delays investor confidence." "No," Sophia said, eyes steady now in a way they had not been before collapse. "It delays arrogance." Then she turned to Eli, whose stomach chose that exact moment to betray him with an audible growl in the silent boardroom. Several executives almost laughed before remembering themselves. Sophia smiled first. "And before anyone else collapses in this building, someone bring lunch." The tension cracked. Even Dominic finally gave the smallest smile, almost hidden, while Eli looked at the long board table and whispered just loud enough for half the room to hear, "This is bigger than our kitchen." For the first time that morning, the boardroom did not feel ruled by fear valuation or deadlines. It felt unexpectedly human. That evening, long after the merger vote had been postponed and revised under terms no one in the room had expected that morning, Whitmore Tower looked different from Sophia Whitmore's office, not because the skyline had changed, but because for the first time in years she was watching the city without a document open in front of her. The revised safety appendix had passed unanimously after Dominic's field corrections were written directly into the emergency deployment model, and even the investors who had complained first eventually admitted that practical credibility would strengthen the company more than rushed signatures ever could. Nathan Mercer had left the boardroom unusually quiet, stripped of his certainty by the simple fact that someone without a title had seen what none of them had bothered to question. Across the long conference table, half-eaten sandwiches and coffee cups remained as proof that the meeting had finally become human enough to include lunch. Eli sat near the window finishing a chocolate cookie. Sophia's assistant had secretly brought him swinging his legs above the floor because the chair was still too large for him. Dominic stood beside the glass, hands in his jacket pockets, looking down at the city with the same distance he had worn at the airport, but something in his posture had softened. "You didn't have to do all this," he said quietly when the room emptied enough that only the three of them remained. Sophia closed the final folder and looked at him directly. "Yesterday you saved my life. Today you saved a company from pretending spreadsheets understand disaster." Eli lifted the cookie slightly. "And I saved this from being wasted." That finally drew a real smile from Dominic, the kind that made him look younger and far less burdened for one brief second. Sophia walked to her desk, opened a thin folder, and handed it to Dominic. Inside was not money, not publicity, not a staged reward, But a formal consulting offer, flexible hours, remote work, allowed emergency readiness review only when he accepted enough compensation to erase the unpaid bills waiting in Queens without touching his dignity. Dominic read the first page, then looked up carefully. "This is too much." "No," Sophia said. "This is what proper value looks like when someone finally notices it." He did not answer immediately. Eli leaned sideways, trying to read upside down. "Does this mean aquarium trip money is easy now?" Dominic blinked, startled, and Sophia understood at once there were details hidden in that innocent sentence that no adult had said aloud. She crouched slightly to Eli's height again. "It means you should absolutely go see the sharks." For the first time since the airport, Dominic's eyes showed something close to surrender, not defeat, but permission to stop resisting kindness when it arrived honestly. Outside sunset spread gold across the glass towers, and when Sophia reached for her tea instead of coffee, Dominic noticed and gave the smallest approving nod. "Breakfast tomorrow, too," he said. Sophia smiled. "Only if your son approves." Eli raised the last piece of cookie like a formal vote. Approved. And for the first time in a long while, none of them were thinking about collapse anymore, only about what quietly begins after someone chooses not to walk away.